Well, hello there, and welcome to day 41 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. As you can see, my usual place has been co-opted by my cat, so the framing is a little differently today. So, after yesterday's viewing of The Shining, I, as you could imagine, was quite overwhelmed by my viewing of the film. And that is definitely a lesson to myself that perhaps turning straight from finishing the film to doing one of these videos in a very sort of heightened emotional state possibly is not the best thing, because I did feel a bit watching back that some of the points I tried to make were not quite as reasoned or well thought out, but I don't know, maybe the emotion of it still resonated. So today I am continuing the theme by watching the 2013 documentary Room 237. Now, this is probably going to be something of a shorter video, because a lot of the points I'm going to talk about are simply going to be things I said yesterday, sort of examine some of the points I made yesterday, and possibly with a bit more space between yesterday's video and today's. What Room 237 really shows and demonstrates was that my point about the fact that a film like The Shining, having so many layers and meanings to it, and the craftsmanship of Stanley Kubrick, means that really you can take away from that film what you want. You will see in it what you want to see. I've often followed the thought exercise and sort of the psychological phenomenon that humans are desperate to find patterns in things. The idea that we will try, because of how we work and how we understand information, we will take random pieces of evidence or completely random, unrelated things and try to find meaning that connects these unrelated objects or events or phenomenon. And so The Shining is a prime example of that, coupled with the ethos of Death of the Author. That is to say that it is very difficult to know how much of what Kubrick intended is perceived by people, or how much of it is people coming to their own conclusions completely outside of Kubrick's original vision for the film. As I said yesterday, Kubrick is an artist that transcends filmmaking. You know, he is very much someone who wanted to make art, and particularly in 2001 A Space Odyssey, he demonstrates the fact that you would watch that film, and frankly, if you're a movie lover, you might not connect with 2001, but if you love sort of the process of film and sort of the artistic merit of filmmaking, you'll see things in 2001 that really, affect you in a way that a traditional movie might not. And similarly, where with The Shining, because it's a more conventional narrative than 2001, as in it has a clear plot and clear characters, it is more difficult to extrapolate, but nonetheless, because of Kubrick's master craftsmanship, there are still things that you can pick out and look at. And the fact that he is not afraid to play out conversations or scenes in the film in a way that a lot of filmmakers would choose to edit, and cut back on sort of the length of conversations, or the fact that characters will fall into a habit of repeating dialogue to each other that would be common in a normal conversation, but in a film, people will say, well, why do they keep saying the same things again and again? And he's trying to create a sense of organic realism, but also it allows you to focus on things outside of the conversation. Things like the framing, the colour, what's going on in the background of shots, and the fact that whether there are things that each time it cuts between characters, you're supposed to notice. Room 237 really is structured in a way that wants to present people who have dedicated significant portions of their life to understanding The Shining in a way that traditionally people might not. These people aren't even in the film industry. These are interviews with historians, artists, psychologists, journalists, people who really, came at this film from the standpoint of someone who is just interested in the works of Kubrick, or was told, oh, they must see this film, went in, saw it, and went away thinking, I have seen something profound. Now, the way it works, really what it is a series of overlapping video essays. It's talking heads, frankly, of different people trying to outline, firstly, their hypothesis of what they think The Shining is about, and then breaking down the film using evidence to try and prove or demonstrate how their thinking is justified in the text of the film. Now, these interviews are overlaid on top of each other, so you don't realise that's how it's being presented initially. And the way it works is you start with someone who says, look, the film, it is obvious to me that the film is about the mistreatment of the Native American people. And as an audience member, that's almost transparent. The Native American iconography exists in the text of the film. There are references to the Native American culture, and in the framing of shots, you will constantly be seeing visual references. And then on top of that, the idea that actually, there are allusions to the guilt and shame, and somehow that plays into the narrative about the white man's burden, as Jack Nicholson says at one point. And so there's one argument to be made there. Then you have someone else who comes at it from the perspective that this film is entirely about the Holocaust, and fixates on the use of certain visual references or allusions to things. And this, as a second viewing, you're thinking, well, okay, I don't see the evidence there in the same way as the first person. Now, he fixates on things like the fact that the number 42 is really important. And, side note, it occurs to me, if I'd have thought this through, really, ideally, I would have made tomorrow's video on room 237, because then it would have been day 42, but, best laid plans. And so the fact that he then goes, the Little Pigs reference that Jack Nicholson says, that Jack Torrance says in the film, is an allusion to the 1933 animation that is which then Kubrick used as a metaphor for the wolf being the Nazis. And again, you think, oh, well, that's a little bit more out there, but he argues his point so well that you think, well, maybe the intention is there. You speak to an artist who says that really the film is a modern retelling of Theseus and the Minotaur. Now, this one, immediately, the iconography, you think, of course, the maze, the fact that the hotel is structured like a maze, the fact that you see Jack Torrance become more monstrous, more bullish. And then even the artist draws attention to the fact that there's a moment where you see two pictures in the background. One, which looks to be a skier, but if you look at the framing of it, is clearly a bull man. And on the other side, a cowboy, of course. Cowboy. Bull man, cowboy. And so you start to go, okay, I can see it, and maybe that was in the back of his mind. And of course, many people say, well, if it's Greek text and Shakespearean text both are, constantly playing throughout modern narratives, and so maybe that's there. But over the course of the film, you're following initially these three arguments, amongst others who are just discussing the film in more broader terms, analysing things like one man who discusses the sexual reading of it and the fact that sex and sexuality is prominent throughout the foreground and background of the film, and whether that's a metaphor for child abuse, and whether that is a subtext that you can read into the film. Things like that. And then you get to the man who makes the very reasoned and rational argument that The Shining is Kubrick's apology for faking the moon landing. And initially, when you see him, and he starts to make the argument, and you don't know what it's about, like the others, you see, he's pulling evidence together without coming to a conclusion to start with. And as you're talking, you're thinking, okay, I can see what he's trying to say here about something. And then he says that, and he says, well, 2001 was Kubrick's attempt to do a trial run before the moon landing, and The Shining is really a narrative about the fact that he had to hide this from his wife, and sequences are about him having, these fictionalized conversations with someone who he had to lie to, and the tension he was put under. And on the one hand, you think, well, he just make a really interesting outlay of evidence and the way that he sort of... And on the other hand, you think, no, he's crazy. This is a man who has pulled together very reasonable evidence and come to a bonkers conclusion. And to some degree, maybe that's the issue about sort of the philosophical nature of things, that sometimes someone can bring the right kind of evidence together and convince you of something bonkers. But in my case, I definitely wasn't there. I sat back as soon as he said the moon landing. I clicked straight into, okay. But even still, the fact that these people, him and the others, all come to these really interesting conclusions, and they really do go to great lengths to discuss how Kubrick came to these arguments and these ways he wants to explore the film. And frankly, 4 out of 5 might be completely in the minds of the people themselves. But it doesn't matter, because the fact that they've taken so much from the film shows the film means so much to people. I was very affected yesterday by it, and I still think that, leaving this section, I am, I do feel strongly about The Shining and its readings, and of course I was going off yesterday about things that I saw in it that I hadn't seen on previous viewings, and possibly I'll see even more in future ones. And I genuinely do think this is one of the greatest films ever made. I think this is a great documentary, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more from the documentarian. There's a film that has just been released called A Glitch in the Matrix that I might watch in a week or two's time, because I am quite interested in his documentary style and the kinds of subject matters that he looks at, so I'm rather looking forward to that. This was a good sit, and I think these were a great double feature, watching The Shining and watching the documentary. There's now the question of whether I go away at some point and watch the sequel starring Ewan McGregor that came out, Doctor Sleep. We'll see. And perhaps at some point. It's not on the cards just yet, but we'll see. So, I'll leave you now. I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.